Really going to focus in on that receptionist front desk type role, because that seemed to be one of the key areas that some of you are having issues with turnover and getting the right fit for that particular role. So part of what our objective is going to be here today is just to take you through, give you a better understanding of some of the costs that are associated with that turnover in that role, which most of you are probably already aware of, and give you a better understanding of how a tool like Select can really help in your selection process, avoid hiring those that aren't a good fit for the role, and really looking at those that have those characteristics that are really needed to be successful in a receptionist front desk type of a role. What we're going to do as we go through here is we're going to try to have you use the chat function inside the GoToWebinar. So if you do have a question, if you can send that over, and as we go through, Josh will go ahead and try to read those questions if there are some as we go along. We want it to be an interactive process. So if we get to a point you have a question, just use that chat function, and we'll go ahead and try to answer those as best we can. So with that, we'll get kind of into the system here itself. You know, as we kind of talk about what's one of those toughest jobs that you're currently facing, and it's really how do we find the right people? So as you well know, hiring is pretty hard to do. It's a time-consuming process. And more importantly, it's probably one of the most important things you do, because we want to make sure we're bringing the right people in. And so if we're not doing that, it can tend to be that bang your head mentality. This particular slide just gives us an area that we look at it from a standpoint of things that we're trying to avoid. And it says 75% of demand for new employees is to replace people that have left the organization. So it's not looking to bring people in that are going to help the organization. It's just trying to replace those that have left. When we talk about some of the costs that are associated with that revenue or that turnover, it's lost revenue. And if we look at it, we've just got some basic examples here. If somebody is being paid $9 an hour and we have that turnover rate of around $4,500 per employee. Well, if you figure that out and you amortize it out over a year based upon what your turnover is, what are those real hard costs as an organization that you're facing year in and year out? So utilizing a tool in your hiring, utilizing an assessment in your hiring practice is going to help reduce some of that. It's not going to make it all go away. We're not going to sit here and say that using the Select is going to take your turnover from 100% and take it down to 5%. That isn't what's going to happen. But what's going to happen is we're going to help reduce some of that. We're going to help those people that are a better fit in the job get hired into that role. But more importantly, looking at those candidates in your selection process that you shouldn't be spending any additional time on, because the likelihood of them being a productive associate as a front desk receptionist is going to be minimal based upon how they fall in the assessment itself. You know, we take a look at some of those challenges, and again, it's pressure to find those qualified employees, not just hiring somebody because we have a void. Taking a look at the number of applicants. You may be in an area where you have a limited number of applicants, so it's more important to make sure that those that we're hiring into the organization are on the higher end of that applicant pool. When you have less qualified applicants or candidates, that becomes a real struggle, because you might end up finding somebody that's the bottom of the barrel and you're just filling that void, and that can become a costly proposition. And oftentimes you have a high need or a rapid response to fill those roles. And so we want to take a look at that. And then, as I talked about earlier, how do we help reduce that turnover that we're having in some of these various roles? And then how does that then correlate to a reduction in turnover costs? These are just some fun little slides. Just take a look at, share a couple of these with you. The one in the middle here is always a fun one. Any other people skills besides 400 Facebook friends? Again, just some levity when we talk about this process, because it can be a laborious process to continually have to hire in people because we're not finding people that have that right fit. Oftentimes we look at this proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing. How do we know who we're hiring? We're limited as hiring authorities, the types of questions that we can ask in the interview process. And so the use of an assessment is going to give us some greater insight into who these individuals are. It's going to allow us to have some additional questions to ask them, and questions that they haven't been able to go out and do a Google search or go to the bookstore and find out those interview questions that most often get asked at this level inside of an organization, because they can be prepared for some of those basic questions. But when we get down into the results from the assessment, we're going to have some real direct questions that they haven't had an opportunity to really prepare themselves for that interview for. And I'll show those to you as we get into it here. When we talk about a resume or an application, there's people that will try to fudge or push that truth. And so it's important, how do we understand who this person is by other means? And so the resume or that application isn't always going to be 100% sound. So we have to have other means to get at who this person is and whether or not they may be a good fit for our given position. We have to have an opportunity to look for objective data. So when we look at this particular select for receptionist role, we're going to be measuring these folks against validated objective data. And so we're going to look and see if people fall within a specific area, their probability of being a productive associate is far greater than those that score in what we refer to as an avoid category. And so we'll see that as, again, as we move through here. One of the things that we always stress is taking a look at the actual selection process. So this is just kind of a flow chart that allows us to see, and you might already have something like this in place, but it allows us to see what's our recruitment message. So what's that message that we're getting out to the candidate pools? What kind of an applicant or pre-screen are we doing? Are we doing an initial sort of the application? Are we doing an initial pre-screen phone conversation or an in-person 5 or 10 minute pre-screen? That's the next step, is where the assessment would come into play. So this is where we would administer the select assessment. And from that, we're going to generate a structured interview that you can utilize. We're going to generate questions specifically based on a candidate's responses to the assessment. And ultimately, the assessment is going to help you in your hiring decision. It's going to be another piece of information that you can then utilize to have a differentiator between one applicant or another. And then the select assessment is also going to go beyond this. And for this hourly wage position, we're actually going to provide some onboarding. So as we hire somebody into the organization, what are some things that we can help them with for some personal development, some day in, day out activities that they can do to improve on the areas that we're identifying through the assessment itself. We like to just give you kind of a sampling of some of the people that are utilizing the select in their hiring needs. These are some pretty large organizations, and so you'll see that there's some really recognizable organizations, and they use this. Some of these are validated specific for their industries and their positions, but it's just a sampling of some of the clients that utilize this select. When we talk about what select is going to help us with, it's really taking a look at not moving forward with candidates that fall what we refer to as our avoid category, and really looking at those that fall in the higher ends of the ranges. And really some statistics out there really just show us that as much as 80% of the turnover is due to just a bad hiring decision. So if we can help you on that front end, we're going to help reduce some of that turnover by putting better qualified people further into that selection process. We're looking at specific personality traits and characteristics that have been validated based upon performance measures that are going to give us that ultimate outcome. So what do we look at? These assessments are going to be really for that associate and hourly level. We're really focusing in on that receptionist. There's an administrative support, and there's a number of other tools that are in the select family that you also would have access to if there was a need inside your practice. But they're really short and targeted. Really, we're talking about 15 or 20 minutes for a candidate to go through this process. We're going to then measure them against those work-related characteristics and again, they're validated against predictive job success. Oftentimes, again, we're going to have these general targeted assessments that are validated specifically for this receptionist type position as an example. And the big differentiator between what we're going to look at here today and what we're referring to as select and some of the other assessments out there is just the validation, the science behind those, the fact that we're going to generate a recommendation of whether we should pursue with someone or not. And then we're going to generate specific questions based upon how they scored against our validated profile. When we take a look at what a candidate would complete, this is just kind of a sampling of the survey itself. So most of the questions are going to be agree, disagree. When we talk about it, here we're saying 10 to 15 minutes. A lot of that depends on if we're going to add some additional pieces as part of that. We have some job task response questions. We have some counterproductive behavior questions, which again are questions dealing with attitudes towards theft, drug use, resistance to direction, safety on the job. So depending on if we incorporate all of those elements, that's where we get to that 15 to 20 minutes. Most of the assessments, though, are going to really focus in on what's one's work pace and energy. What's their frustration tolerance? What's their attitudes towards the customer or the client that's coming in? What kind of integrity do they have? Because we're going to measure that in a variety of ways in through the assessment. So again, here's some examples of some of the other portions of it. We have some basic skills. So if reading or coding is an important part of it, those are some additional pieces. Again, that willingness to do common job tasks, and we're going to show an example of that in the report. So there are some other elements that can be utilized, and again, as we set the systems up, as we get people moving forward, we usually utilize and recommend a combination of all three of these aspects. So when we look at an actual select report, so this happens to be on a receptionist, we're going to be looking at three specific areas. And those three specific areas are what we refer to as a random response. We're also going to refer to an integrity index and a performance index. So this first one at the top is a random response. It's going to say valid or invalid. And really what this is doing is it's saying when the candidate went through and completed the assessment, did they have difficulty reading, or did they just go through and mark answers hoping to pass? If it's valid, as it is here in this example, then we're going to move forward with the rest of the information in the report. If it were to come up as an invalid, typically the recommendation is, if it's an invalid, you're probably going to not move forward with this individual, but you can certainly ask them, did they have difficulty reading? We know that at this level, we probably want them to have a certain level and ability to read. So you as an organization can say, well, if it comes up invalid, then that's somebody we don't want to move forward with. If it's valid, as we see here with this particular example, then we're going to move down to what's referred to as an integrity index. And that integrity index is really a measure of that candidate's attitudes about personal integrity and work ethic. So what we're really talking about here is what's their understanding about coming to work and giving me a day's work for a day's pay. So this particular person scored a good. So we're going to move on down to the next area, which is the performance index. And the performance index is a measure of the traits associated with successful performance in the job. So this performance index score is generated based upon how they scored on our subscales down below. So for the receptionist role, we're looking at energy. What's their activity level and action orientation? We're looking at their frustration tolerance. Can they remain emotionally positive in spite of frustration? What's their accommodation to others? Their willingness to accommodate the desires of others. Their acceptance of diversity. So how tolerant are they of others that are different from themselves? Their positive service attitude, their appreciation of the service role, and how socially outgoing are they? Do they enjoy interacting with people or not? And so depending on how they score here impacts our overall score up above. And there are cutoff scores that impact this. So even though somebody didn't maybe score a flag in some of these areas, depending on where they scored, impacts the overall score. So this example person was a flag for positive service attitude. So if we now look at that, that generated a score of okay. So we're going to move forward with the rest of the report. And here's where we look at some of these optional modules. So this particular job task responses are really just going to set up and say, here are some things that you're going to be asked to do in this role. What is your willingness to do it? And so they would have the ability to say, would do it and enjoy it, all the way to the right-hand side of would not do it. Doesn't impact the scoring that we saw in the previous slide. Again, it gives us an understanding, and it gives them a better understanding of what this job might require me to do. And then those other aspects are these counterproductive behaviors. And so there's a series of questions, if you choose to use counterproductive behaviors, that are, again, looking at job commitment, safety, resistance to direction, theft, drug use. And it's those attitudes that a candidate may have. And what we do is we identify how many questions there are dealing with a specific area, and then we let you know what question that they answer in maybe an inappropriate manner. Again, it's providing you with additional insight. So once we go through and we've looked at what those performance subscales are, we've looked at the integrity index, we've looked at those job task responses, we then get into where the select report will generate an actual interview process for us. And so it goes through, if people aren't familiar with conducting an interview, step one is really giving you some boilerplate information of how we're going to go through and open that interview process. Step two is really talking about what have we done to this point with this applicant, and are there any particular areas that are identified as maybe we need to probe into or investigate a little bit further. And then step three is where we really start getting into the interview questions that are generated inside the select report, and where we're going to get and probe specifically on where this person scored low. So if we think up a page or two, this particular person had low positive service attitude. It was an area that had a flag. So we're going to get in and develop a question specifically focusing on this person's low positive service attitude. So it says, if you're still concerned about the performance flagged areas, here's some additional questions to ask. Low positive service attitude. What did you see as pluses and minuses of a customer service job? Customers/members and team members do you like? Why? What kind did you not like and why? And then we tell you as an interviewer, here's some things that we should be listening to as they respond to this specific question. If we decide to move forward and actually hire this individual, again, the select report is going to provide for us what we refer to as an onboarding report. There's some developmental suggestions that are targeted directly to those new hires to really help them get up to speed, work on some of the areas that we identify, and really help them plan and get into the role so that they can be successful. They're specifically tied to the assessment itself and how they responded, and it allows us to give them an opportunity, because a lot of times hourly wage employees, they don't get a lot for development, and it's unfortunate that way. So what we do here is we say, okay, this particular example says, congratulations on joining our team. We want team members to be as successful as possible right from the start. So we're going to boost their ego right away and say, hey, we value you, and now we want you to work on a couple of things. And so this particular example says low accountability. The assessment results suggest that you may be less goal focused. And so now what we're doing is we're saying, here's some things that you should do day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, that will really help them become more accountable. And that's important. We want them to understand that they are valued, and here are a few things that they can do to really help in that area. Again, this is kind of just a review of that slide that we saw earlier, but it's important to know that when we increase our top performing employees, we're really going to help reduce that turnover. We're going to help make sure that we're putting the right people in the right position. By avoiding the hiring 56% of the poor performing employees, we'll be more pleased, have more pleased patients, and reduce hiring and turnover costs. And I think that's probably one of the number one things that we work with organizations is, how do we help reduce that turnover? By doing so, we're going to reduce that turnover cost. and we're going to put better qualified people in those roles. So they're tenured longer. They may stay in that role for a longer period of time. And they're going to be people that are better suited and have a better fit for that given role, so that their outward towards their customer or client coming in is going to be, I enjoy doing what I'm doing. I'm not just here because I need a paycheck. So with that, Josh, have there been any questions come across? Because now we would just really want to open that up and see what questions that we can try to answer.
Yeah, I don't see any yet, but if you guys, if you have any questions you want to ask for Clint, if you want to drop them in the chat box here, we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. We can definitely get those questions answered.
And I know, Josh, some of the things that we've talked about and you've put up into your site is, we have some specials to get people started on utilizing the assessment. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So we worked with Clint, and we have a few introductory packages. I'll drop the link in here in the chat box, so you guys will have access to that on our website. And we'll also send you up a follow-up email that'll have access to that. So yeah, we have some different packages. One that starts out with as few as 10 reports, all the way up to clinics that would need 30 or more. And then, like Clint was talking about, that particular report was primarily for a receptionist, but they do have other reports. So if you're looking at maybe hiring an associate doctor, more of a higher level of employee that you're looking to hire, they do have some more detailed reports and advanced reports for those type employees. So.
Yeah, and there's a variety of different assessments, and that's something that as some of you start looking at and saying, yeah, I'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the other opportunities, depending on your practice. If you have people that are making outbound calls to patients or to potential new patients, there are some assessments that go beyond just that receptionist for people that are that outbound caller trying to build that patient base up or anything along those lines. So we can certainly share some additional information if there are some other specific needs that you're looking to fill as far as the positions inside your practices.
Okay, well, I don't see any
Josh,
other questions.
one of the things that,
yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that you could do, because I think with the numbers that we have on here right now, do you have a way of unmuting everybody?
Yeah.
Let's just go ahead and do that, and that way, if somebody wants to ask a question, we don't have 100 people on here where they're all going to be talking over themselves. So.
Let's see. Okay, so it looks like we're all unmuted here.
Okay. So again, with that, if there are any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay,
We're
so
here
it looks
to try
like
to answer those questions for you.
I have one here. Is there a one-time fee, or is the cost per test?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's an initial setup, and those are the packages that Josh has posted to his site. And you tend to pay on a per report basis. You're not locked into any sort of a annual agreement. And as Josh mentioned, that those can start with as little as 10 assessments, and there's packages that go if you're a larger practice that way too.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. Well, we'll put you guys can also, I'll put my email in there, so if you have any other questions that you think of, feel free to shoot those over to me, and I will be happy to get them over to Clint and get those answered. You can also drop those in our CRM, and we'll get them all squared away for you.
Yep. That sounds good. Well, I appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to join us, and if you do have some additional questions, just direct those to Josh, and he'll have a chance to get back to you with some answers.
Okay, and then it said, I do have another couple questions
Sure.
here. So it says, do we get the test for further use, or can the test be reused? So I think it is going to, the price does go per test, if I'm correct.
Correct. Yep, and it's only for those that are run. So the way that the system is set up is, well, let's say you have a candidate pool of 5 people, and you put everybody through the assessment, and then you decided of those 5 you only wanted to run 2. You'd only pay for the 2 you run, not for the 5 that tested.
All right, perfect. Well, hey, Clint, I really appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to doing another one of these here soon. And again, guys, just if you have any questions, feel free to email us, or you can go on our live chat or our CRM and leave us a message there, and we'll get right back to you on it. So,
Sounds good. You all have a great day.
all right, thanks.
Thank you.